The briefing room on Station Kepler 442 hummed with the quiet buzz of different species breathing, shifting, and waiting for the session to begin. The air filtration systems worked overtime to accommodate everyone from the methane-breathing Centauri to the moisture-dependent Catherine, who sat in specially designed chairs that misted their skin. Every few minutes, Instructor Vrelther clicked his mandibles together as he surveyed the assembled cadets. His compound eyes could see each one of them simultaneously, a trait that made him an excellent observer and a terrifying examiner during assessments. Cadets. His voice came through the translation device with mechanical precision. You have spent 6 months training for deep space exploration and emergency survival scenarios. Tomorrow you face your final assessment. The room fell silent, except for the gentle hiss of the Catherines. Moisture systems. Relthar tapped a control panel and a holographic display materialized in the center of the room, showing a lush green moon covered in dense forests and winding rivers. It rotated slowly, revealing mountains, valleys, and thick canopies that seemed to stretch forever. This is Virtus 7, an uninhabited forest moon in the Kepler system. Vrolther continued, his antennae twitching as he spoke. You will each be deposited in separate sectors with minimal supplies. 1 standard survival knife, 1 emergency beacon, 1 thermal blanket, and 2 days of ration packs. One of the Centauri cadets, Crixthal, raised a chitinous limb. What are the success parameters, Instructor? Excellent question. Relther's mandibles clicked approvingly. You have exactly 24 hours to construct adequate shelter that meets Academy standards, protection from elements, structural stability, and defensive positioning. Our drones will monitor your progress continuously. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the cadets. 24 hours sounded like enough time, but they all knew the Academy's standards were notoriously strict. Failure means repeating the entire 6-month survival course, Vrelther added. And several cadets visibly slumped at this news in the back row. Specialist Marcus Webb sat quietly, his dark eyes studying the holographic moon with intense focus, while the other cadets whispered nervously to each other, comparing notes on their species' preferred shelter types. Marcus remained silent. The 2 Catherine, Shalara, and Mindos discussed the possibility of finding suitable mud near water sources. Their species had evolved building dome structures from wet clay and organic materials, but they needed significant moisture to work effectively. The Luminar Cadet, a being of pure energy contained within a specialized environmental suit, hummed with concern. Physical construction was challenging for their species, who typically shaped their environments through energy fields rather than manual labor. The 3 Centauri clustered together, their antennae touching as they communicated in rapid clicks and chemical signals. They were already planning their excavation strategy, mapping out the tunnel networks they would dig with their powerful mandibles and specialized digging claws. Marcus watched them all, saying nothing. He had learned early in his academy training that humans were often underestimated by other species, and he had stopped trying to correct their assumptions. The human? Crixthal had once said during a physical training exercise, watching Marcus struggle with a climbing wall designed for species with natural adhesive pads or claws. Humans have no armor, no venom, no natural weapons. They are soft and weak, barely adequate for space exploration. Marcus had simply nodded and kept training. He knew what his instructors seemed to have missed during their xenobiology studies. Humans might not have natural armor, but they had something else entirely. Each of you will be evaluated on efficiency, resource management, and final structural integrity, Vrolther was saying, bringing Marcus's attention back to the briefing. The exercise begins at dawn cycle tomorrow. I suggest you all rest well and review your species-specific survival protocols. The cadets began filing out, still chattering nervously among themselves. Shelara and Mindos were already arguing about the best moisture-to-clay ratio for their planned structure. Marcus stood and stretched, his vertebrae popping in a way that made the nearest Zentari flinch. The insectoid species found the flexibility of human spines deeply unsettling as he walked toward the exit. Professor Delthara, one of the few mammalian instructors at the academy, fell into step beside him. She was a Veloran, covered in sleek fur that shifted colors with her emotions. Currently showing calm blues and greens, you seem unconcerned. Specialist Webb, she said, her whiskers twitching with curiosity. Marcus shrugged. It's a shelter-building exercise, Professor. I'll be fine. The other cadets have been studying and preparing for weeks, Delthara observed. The Zentari have been practicing excavation techniques in the simulation chambers. The Catherine have been reviewing mud structure architecture from their homeworld. And what have you been doing? She asked. Marcus smiled slightly. Thinking. Delthara's fur rippled with amusement. About what? About trees, Marcus said simply, and walked away, leaving the professor staring after him with puzzled interest that night. While the other cadets crammed in last-minute studying or ran final simulations of their building techniques, Marcus lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. His mind wasn't on complex architectural plans or engineering calculations. Instead, he was remembering summer afternoons when he was 9 years old, scrambling up the oak tree in his backyard with his sister Emma. They had spent an entire summer building a treehouse from scrap wood, rope, and determination. He remembered his father teaching him how to lash branches together, how to select the right materials, how to read the strength of a tree by its trunk and branches. He remembered learning which knots held under stress and which ones slipped. Most of all, he remembered how natural it had felt, how intuitive, how the solutions had seemed obvious once you stopped overthinking and just paid attention to what the environment was telling you. Marcus closed his eyes and smiled. The other cadets were treating this like an engineering problem that required complex solutions and extensive planning. But Marcus knew something they didn't. Sometimes the best shelter wasn't the one you built from scratch. Sometimes it was the one you built with what was already there, working with nature instead of against it. At dawn, the transport shuttle carried all the cadets to Vertus 7. Through the viewport, Marcus could see the dense forest canopy below, and his heart rate actually slowed rather than quickened. The Zenari were checking and rechecking their digging claws. The Catherine were doing breathing exercises to prepare for the drier air. The Luminar was cycling through power levels, conserving energy for the work ahead. Marcus simply watched the trees and smiled when the shuttle doors opened and Instructor Vrelther announced the official start of the exercise. Chaos erupted as cadets scrambled to gather their minimal supplies and head to their designated sectors. Marcus took his knife, his beacon, his blanket, and his rations. Then he stepped out onto the forest floor of Vertus 7, took a deep breath of the clean air, and felt like he had come home. The countdown began. 24 hours. Marcus looked up at the towering trees around him, their branches strong and flexible, their leaves broad and waterproof, their trunks straight and sturdy. The other cadets saw a survival challenge. Marcus saw a playground. The monitoring station aboard the orbital platform buzzed with activity as instructors settled in for what they expected to be a long observation period. Multiple screens displayed feeds from autonomous drones tracking each cadet, showing their progress in real time. Instructor Vrelther positioned himself at the central console, his compound eyes perfectly suited for monitoring multiple screens simultaneously. Beside him, Professor Delthara adjusted her seat and pulled up the environmental data for each sector. All cadets have been successfully deployed, announced a technician. Countdown confirmed. 23 hours and 52 minutes remaining. The screen showed vastly different approaches already unfolding across the forest moon in Sector 3. The 3 Zentari cadets had immediately begun their excavation work, Crixthal and his companions moved with mechanical precision, their powerful mandibles tearing through soil and roots as they carved out the beginning of an underground tunnel system. The Zenari are proceeding according to their species template, Relther noted, making entries in his digital log. Estimated completion time, 21 hours. Assuming the root systems don't slow them down too much. The drone camera showed the Zenari working in perfect synchronization, one digging while the others removed soil and reinforced the tunnel walls with a secreted resin their species produced naturally. It was impressive to watch, though painfully slow as they hit dense root networks that their homeworld's softer soil had never prepared them for. In Sector 7, Shelara and Mindos were having a harder time. The Catherine had located a stream within the first 30 minutes, which was excellent for their moisture needs. But the soil composition was wrong. Too much sand. Not enough clay. Shelara's translator device conveyed her frustration as she scooped up handfuls of mud that crumbled apart instead of holding. Together, Mendoz was already showing signs of respiratory stress. The dry forest air was taxing for their species, designed for the humid swamp environments of their homeworld. Their skin was starting to show dry patches despite the portable misting unit attached to their suits. The Catherine are struggling, Professor Delthara observed, her fur shifting to concerned yellows. Should we intervene if their distress increases? Not unless it becomes a medical emergency, Vraltha replied firmly. This is a survival assessment. Discomfort is part of the evaluation. They watched as Shelara and Mindos finally found a clay deposit further upstream and began the laborious process of mixing it with organic materials to create their dome structure. Their movements were exhausted already, and only 1 hour had passed in Sector 12. The Luminar cadet was discovering that being composed of energy had significant disadvantages when it came to physical construction. Their manipulator fields could move small branches and leaves, but the effort required was enormous. The drone footage showed the Luminar trying to weave branches together, their energy form flickering with strain inside their containment suit. Each branch took minutes to position, and the structure was progressing at an agonizingly slow pace. The Lumina will need to manage their energy reserves carefully, Vrelther noted. At this rate, they may complete the shelter, but be too depleted to function afterward. It's within acceptable parameters, Delthara said, though her fur showed concerned orange streaks. Barely. Then there was Sector 5, where Specialist Marcus Webb had been deployed. The drone camera showed Marcus standing at the edge of his designated area, not moving, not building, just looking around. He walked slowly through the forest, occasionally stopping to examine a tree or touch the soil. What is the human doing? Relther's antennae twitched with confusion. The exercise has already begun. He should be gathering materials and constructing shelter. Delthara leaned forward, watching Marcus with interest. He's assessing. Humans are known for preliminary environmental analysis before action. Inefficient. Relther clicked his mandibles. The Zentari began excavating immediately. The Catherine located water within 30 minutes. Even the struggling Luminar started construction right away. Different species. Different methodologies, Delthora said mildly, though she too was puzzled by Marcus's leisurely pace on screen. Marcus had stopped at a cluster of 3 young trees growing close together. He looked up at their branches, then down at their root systems. He pulled out his knife and made a small test cut on a nearby vine, examining the flexibility and strength. Then he walked to a different area, looked at some broad-leaf plants, felt the texture of the leaves between his fingers. He found a slight elevation in the terrain and stood there for several minutes, just observing. 37 minutes have elapsed, Vralther reported, his tone growing more concerned. Specialist Webb has not begun construction. He has not even gathered materials. Perhaps he's formulating a plan, Delthara suggested. Though her whiskers were twitching with uncertainty, the exercise was designed to test immediate survival skills, not prolonged strategic planning, Vrelther said. At this rate, he will run out of time. But then Marcus moved, and when he moved, everything changed. He returned to the cluster of 3 trees and began working with sudden focused intensity. His knife flashed as he cut vines, selecting specific ones and rejecting others. He moved with practiced ease, his hands working quickly and efficiently. His heart rate is barely elevated, the medical technician reported, monitoring the biometric data from Marcus's emergency beacon. Respiration normal. Stress hormones minimal. Vrelther watched with growing interest as Marcus began climbing one of the trees with casual grace. The human's flexible joints and opposable thumbs made the ascent look effortless, and within minutes, he was 4 meters off the ground, moving among the branches. What is he doing up there? Vrelther wondered aloud. They watched as Marcus began lashing vines between the 3 trees, creating a framework in the canopy. His movements were quick and confident, each knot tied with practiced ease. Each vine placement seemingly instinctive rather than calculated. Meanwhile, the other cadets continued their struggles. The Zeneria had hit a massive root system that was forcing them to redirect their entire tunnel network. They were barely 15% complete and already falling behind their projected schedule. The Catherine had managed to build the base of their dome structure, but Mindos had collapsed twice from respiratory distress. They were taking longer and longer breaks, their efficiency plummeting. The Luminar was making steady progress, but at a terrible cost. Their energy signature was fluctuating dangerously, and the medical monitors were showing concerning power depletion rates. Should we begin preparing for potential failures? A junior instructor asked. The K3 may not complete in time, and the Lumina is risking complete energy exhaustion. We observe and evaluate, Vrelther said firmly. They knew the parameters. 3 hours into the exercise, Marcus was moving with remarkable speed. He had created a platform between the 3 trees using lashed branches, and was now weaving a latticework of smaller branches and vines to create a floor. The other instructors had begun gathering around the monitor showing Marcus's feed, watching with fascination as the structure took shape. Is that a dwelling platform? Someone asked. In the trees? Humans evolved as tree climbers, Delthara said, accessing her database. Their ancestors lived partially in trees for safety from ground predators. This is utilizing evolutionary memory. Marcus was now adding walls to his platform, using broad leaves layered like tiles. Each leaf overlapped the next, creating a waterproof barrier that would shed rain efficiently. He's moving faster than all the other cadets combined, the medical technician said with awe. And his stress levels are actually lower than when he started. Vrelther made rapid notes, his mandibles clicking with confusion and grudging respect. The human's approach is unorthodox, but demonstrating unexpected efficiency. By hour 5, while the Zeneri were still excavating, the Catherine were struggling to raise the walls of their dome, and the Lumina was taking extended rest periods to conserve energy. Marcus was putting finishing touches on what could only be described as a complete treehouse. Had woven a sleeping hammock inside the structure, created a small fire pit on a clay-lined section of the platform, and even fashioned a crude water collection system using hollowed bark channels. This is impossible, Vrelther whispered. The exercise was calculated to require 24 hours minimum, based on average construction times across all known species. Perhaps, Delthara said softly, her fur rippling with colors they couldn't quite interpret. Our calculations didn't account for humans. At hour 6, Marcus Webb climbed into his hammock, adjusted his thermal blanket, and closed his eyes. The monitoring station fell completely silent. Is he? Vrelther started. his antennae frozen in disbelief. Is the human sleeping? Biometric readings confirm. Specialist Webb has entered a rest cycle, the medical technician reported. Sounding equally stunned on the screen, Marcus slept peacefully in his treehouse, 4.5 meters above the forest floor, in a structure that met every single requirement of the exercise, with 18 hours still remaining on the countdown. The monitoring station had become uncomfortably quiet as the instructor stared at the screen showing Marcus Webb sleeping peacefully in his treehouse. The only sounds were the gentle hums of equipment and the occasional nervous click from Relther's mandibles. Run a diagnostic on the drone, Relther ordered, his voice tight with controlled confusion. Verify all sensor readings. The technician ran the check twice, then a third time. All systems functioning normally, instructor. The human has indeed completed a structurally sound shelter and entered a rest cycle. Professor Delthara's fur had shifted through a dozen colors in the past few minutes, finally settling on a bewildered mixture of purple and gold. How long did it take him? From initial deployment to final construction, 5 hours and 43 minutes. The technician reported, rechecking the time stops. He spent approximately 37 minutes on environmental assessment, then 4 hours and 56 minutes on active construction, then 10 minutes on what appears to be interior arrangement. Relthor made a sharp clicking sound that his species used to express extreme skepticism. Replay the entire sequence. I want to see every moment. The screen shifted to show a time-lapse of Marcus's work from the beginning. They watched him walk through the forest with that maddeningly calm pace, stopping occasionally to examine trees and plants with what had seemed like random interest. He was selecting his construction site, Delthara said, understanding dawning in her voice. Not random at all. He was looking for specific criteria. They watched Marcus choose the 3 trees, test the vines, examine the leaves. Every action that had seemed wasteful or inefficient now revealed itself as purposeful selection. Then came the construction phase. And even in fast forward, the speed and confidence of Marcus's movements was startling. He climbed, cut, lashed, and wove with the kind of fluid grace that suggested deep familiarity rather than learned skill. Pause there, Relther commanded, and the image froze on Marcus tying a complex knot in a vine. What kind of knot is that? Delthara accessed the human cultural database, her paws flying over the console. It's called a clove hitch, used in human sailing and climbing activities. Extremely strong and reliable for lashing perpendicular objects together. And there, another instructor pointed at the screen where Marcus was layering leaves on the roof. That overlapping pattern, shingling, Delthara read from her database. An ancient human roofing technique that allows water to run off while preventing penetration. Used in human architecture for thousands of their years. Relther's antennae were vibrating rapidly, a sign of deep agitation in his species. The human didn't invent these techniques on the spot. He already knew them. This was pre-existing knowledge. Of course it was, Delthara said, and now her fur was shifting to amused greens and blues. Relther, pull up the human cultural files. Search for Treehouse. The instructor did so, and his mandibles fell open in shock as thousands of images flooded the screen. Human children sitting in wooden platforms built in trees. Elaborate multi-room structures suspended in forest canopies. Simple platforms made from rope and boards. Complex designs with slides and swings attached. These are recreational structures, Relther said slowly, as if testing each word. Human juveniles build these for entertainment? Not just juveniles. Delthara was reading rapidly, her whiskers twitching with barely suppressed amusement. Adult humans build them too. There are entire resorts on Earth where humans pay credits to sleep in elaborate tree dwellings. Some human cultures have lived in tree houses for generations, We designed this exercise as a maximum difficulty survival challenge, Relther said, his voice hollow with realization. And for humans, this is childhood play activity. A junior instructor who had been monitoring the other cadets suddenly spoke up. Instructors, you should see the progress reports from the other sectors. The screen shifted to show the ongoing struggles of the remaining cadets. The Zentari were now 8 hours into their excavation, barely halfway complete. Their movements showing signs of fatigue as they battled the unexpected. Root Densiticric's Thales mandibles were working overtime, chewing through a particularly thick root. His companions were using their resin to shore up a tunnel wall that had partially collapsed. They were making progress, but it was painfully slow in the Catherine sector. Sha'ara and Mindos had managed to construct about 60% of their dome structure, but both were showing severe signs of distress. Mindos had to stop every few minutes to use the emergency misting unit, their skin cracking from the dry air. The Catherine are approaching medical intervention thresholds. The medical technician warned, if they don't complete soon, we may need to pull them for health reasons. The Lumina was doing slightly better, having reached approximately 70% completion, but their energy signature was fluctuating wildly. The containment suit's power reserves were dangerously low, and the being inside was dimming visibly. All cadets are experiencing significant stress and fatigue. Relther summarized, looking at the biometric data. All except the human stress hormones are actually lower than baseline. The medical technician interrupted, sounding baffled. His heart rate is consistent with deep sleep. Respiration is slow and regular. By every measure, Specialist Webb is more relaxed now than when he started the exercise. They all looked back at the screen showing Marcus's sector. The treehouse sat peacefully in the canopy, swaying slightly in the breeze, and inside the sleeping human looked completely comfortable. What is that? Someone asked, pointing at the screen. The drone camera zoomed in to show that Marcus had arranged his supplies around the interior of the treehouse with neat precision. The ration packs were stacked in one corner. The emergency beacon was positioned where it could signal clearly through the canopy. The thermal blanket was being used as a hammock liner, but there was something else. Small bundles of what looked like gathered materials arranged in another corner. Enhance that image. Relther ordered the camera zoomed further, and they could see that Marcus had collected additional resources during his construction. Dried wood arranged for easy fire starting. Bundles of edible plants that the sensors identified as nutritious and safe. Even what appeared to be processed bark fiber that could be used as cordage. He's not just surviving, Dilthara said softly. He's thriving. Our 12 arrived, and the drone protocols required a systematic check of all sectors. The cameras cycled through each cadet, documenting their progress for the official record January, 62% complete. On revised schedule, but showing fatigue 3, 78% complete. Both cadets requiring medical monitoring Luminar, 85% complete. Energy reserves critical, and then the camera reached Sector 5. Marcus Webb was awake now, stretching in his hammock with the casual ease of someone who had enjoyed a good rest. The timestamp showed he had slept for nearly 6 hours straight. He's moving, the technician reported unnecessarily. As everyone was already watching, Marcus climbed down from his hammock and surveyed his treehouse with what looked like critical assessment. Then, to the complete astonishment of everyone watching, he began making improvements. What is he doing? Relther demanded. The shelter is complete. Why is he modifying it? They watched as Marcus wove additional supports into the platform, strengthening areas that were already perfectly adequate. He added a rope ladder that descended from one side, creating easier access than the climbing route he had used initially. He's optimizing, Delthara said, fascination clear in her voice. The structure was sufficient, but he's making it better. Marcus then did something that made several instructors gasp. He built a small fire on the clay-lined section of his platform. Fire! Someone yelped. In a wooden structure. The clay lining prevents ignition. Delthara interrupted. Her database pulled up on screen. It's a technique humans have used for millennia. Controlled fire in elevated structures for warmth, cooking, and protection from predators. The drone's thermal sensors showed the fire burning steadily, contained safely within the clay barrier. Marcus was using it to cook something, and as the camera enhanced, they could see he was roasting what appeared to be fish. When did he catch fish? Vrelthar's antennae were practically vibrating off his head. Playback shows he descended to the nearby stream at hour 10. The technician reported, pulling up the footage. He was awake for approximately 47 minutes before we noticed. He caught 3 fish using an improvised spear, returned to the treehouse, and resumed sleeping. He woke up, caught lunch, went back to sleep, and we didn't even notice, a junior instructor said. Sounding dazed, Marcus finished cooking his fish, ate it with obvious enjoyment, added some of the edible plants he had gathered, and then did something that broke the remaining composure in the monitoring station. He leaned back against his treehouse wall, hands behind his head, and simply watched the sunset through the forest canopy. Completely relaxed. This is absurd, Vrelthar said. But there was no anger in his voice anymore, just bewildered resignation. The exercise was designed to push cadets to their limits, to test their survival capabilities under stress. And the human, Delthara finished, her fur rippling with colors that suggested both amusement and something approaching respect, is... The hours crawled by in the monitoring station as the instructors watched the other cadets struggle toward completion, while Marcus Webb continued his inexplicable camping vacation in Sector 5 Hour. 18 marked a turning point for the Catherine. Shalara and Mindos finally completed their dome structure, both immediately collapsing inside it from exhaustion. Their biometric readings showed dangerous dehydration levels, despite the misting units, and their respiratory systems were severely stressed from the prolonged exposure to dry air. Medical team to Sector 7. Vrelthar ordered. Non-emergency extraction once they've rested. They completed the objective, but need immediate care. The Zenari were still excavating at hour 21, their movements now sluggish with fatigue. The complex root systems of Virtus 7 had turned their carefully planned tunnel network into an improvised maze that barely met structural standards. Crick still emerged from the tunnel entrance, his once gleaming carapace now dulled with dirt and plant matter. His mandibles clicked weakly as he signaled to his companions, and together they reinforced the final support beam with the last of their resin reserves. Zenari shelter complete at 21 hours, 7 minutes, the technician logged. Marginally acceptable structural integrity. All 3 cadets showing severe fatigue. The Luminar was the most concerning case. Their energy signature had dropped to critical levels, flickering like a candle about to go out. They were working with desperate determination, their manipulator fields barely strong enough to position the final branches at hour 23 and 28 minutes. With only 32 minutes remaining, the Luminar placed the last structural element and immediately went into low-power conservation mode. Their form barely visible inside the containment suit. All cadets have completed their shelters, Vrelthar announced, though his antennae drooped with concern. Prepare extraction teams. Several will need immediate medical attention. What about Specialist Webb? Someone asked. Everyone looked at the screen showing Marcus's sector. The human had apparently decided to add decorative elements to his treehouse, weaving patterns into the vinework that served no structural purpose but looked aesthetically pleasing. The human, Vrelthar said with a long-suffering click of his mandibles. We'll be fine. As the countdown reached 0 and the exercise officially concluded, Professor Delthara began compiling her analysis report. What had started as a routine survival assessment had turned into something far more significant. "Vrelther," she said quietly, pulling up comparative data on her screen. "We need to discuss the implications of this exercise." The Zentari instructor joined her, his compound eyes scanning the information she displayed. Charts showed completion times, stress levels, resource usage, and final structural assessments for all cadets. The human completed in less than 1/4 of the allocated time, Delthara pointed out. His stress levels never exceeded baseline. He used fewer resources than any other cadet, and his structure received the highest stability ratings from the drone scanners. "I can see the data," Vrelther replied. "What's your point?" "My point is that we designed this exercise based on survival challenges faced by species from relatively gentle homeworlds." Delthara's fur shifted to serious blues and grays. The Zentari evolved on a planet with soft soil and few predators. The Catherine developed in warm swamps with abundant water. The Luminar emerged in energy-rich environments that required no physical construction. She pulled up a file on Earth, and Vrelther's antennae twitched as he read the environmental classification. "Earth is rated as a Class 4 death world," Delthara continued. "Extreme temperature variations, dangerous megafauna, frequent natural disasters, scarce resources in most biomes, and countless organisms evolved specifically to kill or consume humans." The screen showed images from Earth. Massive predators with teeth the size of daggers. Weather systems that could level entire forests, deserts where water was precious. Frozen wastelands where exposure meant death in minutes. "Humans didn't just survive on Earth," Delthara said softly. "They thrived. They spread to every biome on the planet. They built shelters in environments that would kill most spacefaring species in hours. And they did it so successfully that they turned survival skills into children's games." Vrelther was quiet for a long moment. "You're saying our assessment metrics are fundamentally flawed when applied to humans." "I'm saying that what we consider a maximum difficulty survival challenge is something human children do for fun during their warm season breaks," Delthara replied. "Look at the cultural database entries for summer camp." She pulled up thousands of images showing young humans building shelters, starting fires, navigating wilderness, all under minimal supervision and all treated as recreational education. "Earth parents send their offspring into the wilderness as a leisure activity," Vrelther said slowly, his translator struggling to convey his disbelief. "They pay credits for this." "Exactly." Delthara's whiskers twitched. "And our specialist web?" His file shows he grew up in a rural area of Earth called Montana. He built his first treehouse at age 9 with his sibling. She pulled up Marcus's childhood photos, showing a younger version of the human grinning from a rickety platform in a large tree. His sister beside him. "He's been training for this exercise since he was a juvenile," Vrelther realized. "Not in an academy, not in simulations, but as play, as bonding time with his family." The extraction shuttles began arriving at each sector. Medical teams rushed to assist the exhausted alien cadets while Marcus Webb simply climbed down from his treehouse, looking refreshed and carrying a woven basket full of the supplies he had gathered. The shuttle pilot, who picked up Marcus, reported back with confusion in his voice. "Instructor, Specialist Webb is asking if he can return to collect his treehouse. He says he put a lot of work into it, and it seems a shame to just leave it." Vrelther made a sound that the translator couldn't quite process. "Tell him he can retrieve it during the next moon cycle if he wishes." "Understood, sir." "Also, he's asking if there are any more survival exercises scheduled because he finds them relaxing." Delthar's fur rippled with barely contained amusement as Vrelther slumped in his chair. When all the cadets were assembled in the debriefing room, the contrast was striking. The Zentari were cleaned up, but still exhausted, their movements slow and careful. The Catherine were medical monitoring tanks, recovering from their ordeal. The luminaire was connected to emergency power systems. Their lights still dim, and Marcus Webb sat comfortably in his chair, looking like he had just returned from a pleasant walk. "Cadets," Vrelther began, his voice carrying the weight of his realization, "you have all completed the shelter construction exercise. Some of you barely made the deadline. Some of you required medical intervention. All of you were pushed to your limits." He paused, looking at Marcus. "And one of you apparently went camping." A few nervous clicks and whistles came from the assembled cadets. Unsure if this was criticism or observation, Specialist Webb, Vrelther continued, "Your completion time was 5 hours and 43 minutes. This is the fastest completion in the Academy's history by a margin of 14 hours. Can you explain your methodology?" Marcus shifted slightly, looking genuinely unsure how to respond. "I built a treehouse, sir. It seemed like the most logical approach given the environment." "Most logical," Vrelther repeated. "Cadet Crickstill, what was your species approach based on?" The Centauri straightened slightly. "Underground excavation, instructor. It's how my people have sheltered for thousands of generations. It provides protection, insulation, and security. And it took you over 21 hours in an environment with dense root systems," Vrelther noted. "Shelara Mindos, explain your approach." Shelara spoke weakly from her recovery tank. "Dome construction using mud and clay, instructor. Traditional Catherine architecture. It maintains moisture and provides thermal regulation. In an environment with limited suitable clay and dry air that severely taxed your respiratory systems," Vrelther observed. He turned back to Marcus. "And you, Specialist Webb, chose to build in the trees. Why?" Marcus thought for a moment. "The trees were already there, sir. They were strong, stable, and elevated. Building on the ground meant dealing with moisture, ground predators, and limited visibility. Building in the canopy used existing structures, provided safety, and took advantage of air circulation. You worked with the environment rather than against it." Professor Delthara interjected, her tone approving. "I guess so," Marcus agreed. "That's just how you build tree houses. You find good trees and work with them." Crickstill's antennae quivered. "You speak of tree houses as if they are common knowledge. Are they part of human military training?" "No," Marcus said, looking slightly embarrassed now. "They're just something kids build. My dad helped my sister and me make one when we were little. Most of my friends had them too." The room fell silent as the alien cadets processed this information. They had struggled with every ounce of their strength and ability to complete an exercise that this human had learned as childhood recreation. "So when you were selecting your site," the luminaire asked, their voice weak but curious, "that wasn't tactical analysis. That was play experience?" "I mean, I was being tactical," Marcus protested mildly. "But yeah, mostly I." The Academy's recreation forest had been established years ago as a place for cadets to relax between intensive training sessions. It featured carefully cultivated trees from various worlds, open spaces for different species' preferred leisure activities, and peaceful walking paths through gentle woodlands. Now it was filled with the sounds of confusion, determination, and occasional frustration as Marcus Webb attempted to teach treehouse construction to his fellow cadets. "No, no," Marcus called up to Crickstill, who was clinging awkwardly to a tree branch about 2 meters off the ground. "You need to trust the branch. It'll hold you. See how thick it is." The Centauri's mandibles clicked nervously. "My species does not climb. We burrow. This is deeply unnatural. I know it feels weird at first," Marcus encouraged, "but look." He scrambled up the tree with easy grace, his movements fluid and confident. "See? The branch barely bends. It's solid." Crickstill made a sound that the translator interpreted as deeply skeptical, but slowly, carefully, he moved further out on the branch. His multiple legs gave him good grip once he committed to the movement below. Shelara and Mindos were practicing knot tying with lengths of synthetic rope that Marcus had provided. Their manipulator appendages were different from human hands, but they were gradually getting the hang of the clove hitch. Loop it around, then through, Mindos muttered, their moisture suit hissing gently. Why are there so many different knots? Each one has a purpose, Marcus explained, dropping down from the tree with a casual leap that made several cadets flinch. Clove hitch is for attaching rope to poles or branches. Square knot is for joining two ropes together. Baleine makes a loop that won't slip. You need different knots for different jobs. The Luminar was hovering nearby, their energy form contained within their suit, watching with intense focus. Human, your species developed all these techniques without energy manipulation or advanced technology. Well, we had technology, Marcus said. But yeah, a lot of this stuff is really old. Humans have been tying knots and building shelters for thousands of years. It's kind of fundamental to who we are, Professor Delthara observed from a respectful distance, taking notes and occasionally offering encouragement. She had been studying human culture extensively since the shelter exercise, and each discovery had been equally fascinating and humbling. The key thing to remember, Marcus was saying, addressing the whole group now, is that you're not fighting the environment. You're working with it. The trees want to grow upward, so you use that. The vines want to be flexible, so you use that. Everything has properties you can work with if you pay attention. But how do you know what properties to look for? Ask one of the Zentarii experience mostly, Marcus admitted. An observation. Like, see this tree here? He tapped a tall specimen with spreading branches. The bark is rough, which means good grip. The branches are evenly spaced, which means good platforms. And it's near these other two trees, which means I can build a structure that uses all three for stability. He pointed to a different tree. Now the one has smooth bark, branches that are too high up, and it's isolated. Bad choice for a treehouse. Maybe good for other things, but not what we need. Crickstill had finally made it all the way out on the branch, and was clinging there with what might have been pride. I am not falling. You're doing great. Marcus called up enthusiastically. Now try moving to the next branch. Absolutely not. Crickstill replied firmly. This branch is sufficient. I shall stay here, Marcus laughed. Fair enough. Come down when you're ready. Over the following weeks, the cross-species training sessions became a regular feature of the academy. Marcus taught treehouse construction, knot tying, and environmental awareness. The Zentarii taught excavation techniques and underground shelter design. The Catherine demonstrated their sophisticated mud architecture. The Luminar shared energy field construction methods. What emerged was a new understanding among the cadets. Every species had valuable knowledge, shaped by their unique evolutionary history. And by sharing these different approaches, they all became more capable. But there was something else too. Something Vrelther noted in his reports. The humans brought a quality that was difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. It was in the way Marcus taught. With patience and enthusiasm, treating each student's struggles as normal rather than failures. It was in his insistence that learning should be fun, that challenges should be enjoyed rather than merely endured. He's built 6 treehouses now, Delthara told Vrelther one evening as they reviewed the training program's progress. One for teaching purposes, one that Crickstill requested help with, one for the Catherine who wanted to experience elevated sleeping, one for the Luminar to study structural integration, and 2 just because other cadets asked, and he does this voluntarily? Vrelther asked. In his recreation time? He says it's relaxing. Delthara's fur rippled with amusement. He's also started a casual group that goes into the forest on rest days to practice wilderness skills. They call it Camping Club. Vrelther pulled up the footage from the latest camping trip. A mixed group of species sat around a human-style campfire, safely contained. Marcus insisted on fire safety, cooking food, and sharing stories. Marcus was teaching them human songs about forests and adventure. They're enjoying themselves. Vrelther observed, his antennae twitching with something that might have been approval. More than that, they're bonding. Learning to work together across species boundaries. That's what humans do, Delthara said softly. They survived on a death world, not just through individual skill, but through cooperation. They built communities, shared knowledge, turned survival into social activities. It's deeply embedded in their nature. 3 months after the shelter exercise, Vrelther was reviewing the Academy's updated curriculum when a communication came through from the Galactic Exploration Council. They had heard about the revised survival training program and wanted details. The instructor prepared his report carefully, knowing it would be read by officials across multiple systems. Recommendation: comprehensive review of all survival protocols and training standards. Current metrics are based on species from mild environments and do not account for the capabilities of species from high-challenge worlds. Human baseline competencies require us to recalibrate our understanding of difficult survival scenarios. He paused, then added, further recommendation: integration of human teaching methodologies into standard curriculum. Human approach to education emphasizes practical experience, iterative learning, and finding enjoyment in challenges. These principles have demonstrated significant improvements in cadet performance and interspecies cooperation. As he filed the report, Vrelther heard laughter from the recreation forest. Looking out the window, he saw Marcus and a group of cadets working on yet another treehouse. This one apparently designed to hold multiple species, with different environmental medscricts. Thul was in the tree now, moving with growing confidence among the branches. Shara was directing the weaving of waterproof panels from her platform in a moisture tent Marcus had integrated into the design. The Luminar was providing ambient lighting while learning human construction techniques, and Marcus was in the middle of it all, laughing and teaching and building, making survival look like play and turning play into invaluable skills. Your species is very strange. Marcus Webb, Vrelther murmured. But there was warmth in his translator's tone now, something like respect. Strange, yes, but strange in ways that made everyone around them better. The next semester brought new cadets to the academy, including several humans. They arrived expecting to face the legendary shelter exercise. Having heard stories about Specialist Webb's achievement, what they found instead was an academy transformed. Survival training that emphasized working with environments rather than conquering them. Cross-species cooperation built through shared learning. And at the center of it all, the understanding that the best skills were ones you could enjoy practicing on Virtus 7. Marcus's original treehouse still stood in the forest canopy. He had returned to maintain it, and now it served as a teaching site where cadets could see practical application of human construction techniques. A plaque had been installed at the base of the tree. Though Marcus had protested it was unnecessary, the shelter exercise lasted 24 hours, but the human was already sleeping in a treehouse. A reminder that every species brings unique strengths. When asked about the plaque during an interview, Marcus had just shrugged and smiled. I really just built a treehouse. I don't know why everyone made such a big deal about it, but Professor Delthara knew why. She had seen the shift in academy culture, the way other species now approach challenges with more creativity and less rigid adherence to their traditional methods. She had watched as the concept of working with the environment spread beyond survival training into engineering. Diplomacy and strategic planning. Humans didn't just survive their death world. They learned to thrive there by being adaptable, creative, and willing to find joy in the challenge. And now they were sharing those lessons across the stars. Late one evening, Marcus sat in the recreation forest with Crixto, both of them working on a new project, a hybrid shelter that combined human treehouse design with Zentari tunnel engineering, creating something